Hello, dear viewer, and welcome to another episode of Just in Time World. What I would like to discuss today is the evolution of a government. Before we get into it, please do like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content. It really does help me let the channel grow. Alright, let's get into it. First, a caveat. I'm going to exclude magic. The reason why I'm excluding magic from this video is because magic has a deep and fundamental impact on one's government. This is because if you give someone the power to overthrow a government all by themselves without needing to build an army, without needing popular support, you change the levers of power. So I believe that magic deserves its own video, which I will make probably next month sometime. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to be talking as though magic doesn't exist in my world. So, what do I talk about when I say the evolution of government? When I defined the government of the Empire of Lemurion for the first time, I had a very, very simplistic structure. It was the emperor, the dukes, the counts, the barons, and everybody else is a sucker. That's it. That's not a very nuanced or textured approach, obviously. So, as soon as my plotline started interacting with local government in any significant way, I found that my government just wasn't fit for task anymore. Also, when I started going back and defining some historical elements, writing a prologue, adding some notes, adding references to the past in dialogue, I found that my history didn't support my government. Now, the reason why that is because my empire is quite old. It's nearly 2,000 years old. Now, that's a non-trivial length of time. And a government that is as authoritarian as my rigidly structured hierarchy won't make it. It won't make it for that length of time. And the reason why is because you only have to look at our own history, the history of planet Earth. And you'll see that time and time again, if you put people in a corner, if you box them up and say, like, you have no agency, eventually they will rebel. They will rebel, there will be violent redistribution of power and wealth, and your government will fall. So if my government in this structure with only minor palace coups had been in place for so long, there had to be more to it than just this very simplistic structure. Now, I am very into Roman history, and I've done a fair chunk of research on the topic. I'll link some of it down below. Specifically, I would recommend, if you're getting into it, Mike Duncan's podcast, History Civilis channel on YouTube, and Overly Sarcastic Productions Roman content. I will link all of those down below. So, in the Roman Republic specifically, there was a position called Tribune Plebis. Now, the Tribune Plebis was a very important position. It was elected from the Plebs, which was Rome's biggest, most populous tribe. And ain't that always the way, you know? Biggest, most populous tribe, least political power. Anyway, so the Plebs elected this Tribune Plebis. Now, the Tribune Plebis could assemble the plebs, which meant that they had the power to call a very large number of people together. They could propose bills that had to be voted on by the assembly. They could pass binding resolutions, and they could protect the people from the excesses of the magistrates and of the patricians, and they generally acted as a means for the people to shelter themselves from the attacks of nobles. Now, I think that that is one of the reasons why the Roman Republic lasted so long, and it was when that office started becoming corrupted that the, 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 the road was really paved for the Roman Republic to fall. But I'm not here to talk about the Roman Republic and its rise and fall, much as that is a fascinating topic. I am here to talk about what I learned from this. So what I took from this piece of history is that if I want my government to stand for a long time, I needed a champion of the people. I needed somebody that the people could turn to in extremis and say, help us please, this noble is oppressing us. Otherwise, I was going to end up with revolutions and rebellions as people were pushed too far. Okay, so that's easy enough, right? Just insert the champion of the people. Well, no, because in the context of my world, I had two peoples. I had the Konsang people who had come as refugees, as militant refugees, and I had the tribes people who had inhabited the Bloedben Peninsula before that. The Konsang had originally just conquered the tribes. But if I wanted the champion of the people, I needed them to come from the majority of the population, right? Now, the Konsang were not the majority, obviously. They were refugees. So the champion of the people had to come from the tribes. That meant that the tribes couldn't have been entirely just conquered, because if you unconditionally surrender, you don't get to set any terms. So I changed the way that conquest has happened so that the Konsang only got up to a certain point in the Bloedben Peninsula, and then the tribes managed to stop them. Then, once I had that in place, I then said, okay, now the Konsang king struck a deal with the tribal leaders. Now, the tribes had had their shamans, the blood sorcerers, the sang sorcery practitioners. But, I mean, if you think about it, you wouldn't like to have a shaman who is also looking at you like a battery, right? I mean, the Aztecs made it work, but for how long, really? It's kind of dodgy, and they only did it on formal occasions. So I had some scope to play with. So my Konsang conquerors struck a deal with the tribal leaders who were not the shamans. Right? Now, what I'd done there is to juxtapose the leaders, the shamans of the tribes. I'd created military leaders of the tribes to be elected from the mothers of the tribe, because my shamans were all male. Right? So I had male shamans who held magical personal power, and then I had the female military leaders. And the female military leaders were elected officials, right? And I'll go into at some point why I did it that way with the sexes and why I specifically made the military leaders female. I'll cover that in another video. So when the Konsang incorporated the tribal governance structure in this deal to make one people, to make one people, what they did was they said, we'll keep that elected official. But instead of being in charge of the military, we'll put you in charge of ensuring the safety of the people. We'll put you in charge of judging the laws. We'll give you agency and scope to be rechtsprekers, speakers of the law. So they became forerunners of what will eventually, if it went on to our timeline, be judges and the police arm of the government. And so I introduced that concept as the champion of my people. So what they do is they run the city watch, if there is one. Obviously not every city is big enough to have a city watch. Some of them depend on hue and cry. They're judges, so they can judge cases. So the common man, if he feels he's been hard done by, can take a noble before the rechtsspreker and have it be judged. And they are funded through taxation in part and through merchant payments to the City Watch in part. So their financing is quite separate from, say, the nobles' income, preventing them from being bribed. So as long as the rechtssprekers didn't fall to corruption, the people would always have agency. And this gave me my champion of the people. In conclusion, if you want a long-standing government, you need an avenue for people to appeal for justice. Otherwise, there are going to be rebellions and revolts. So comment down below to mention any champions that you've seen in fantasy novels, or fantasy novels that could really have used a champion. Also comment down below if you've seen governments similar to what has existed in our own world. Also, if you've got anything to say on the topic of the Roman government, the Roman Republic, its rise and fall, its government, feel free to comment down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next week for another video.